Do you feel like the best days of your life are behind you? Like you've spent most of your life in varying seasons of fearfulness, fruitlessness, and frustration? Are you tired of simply limping along? Are you ready to walk by faith? If so, then you're in the right place. I'm Rewa, and welcome to Pressing Toward the Mark Productions, a platform for broken, hidden women, heavy from the weight of emptiness, that are searching for a safe place to exchange their broken pieces for God's perfect peace so that they can live whole and healthy lives. And using the biblical story from John chapter 5 and inspired by my Withered and Waiting blog, this video series has highlighted 4 lessons that I believe that we can learn from the man at the pool of Bethesda. Lesson 1 was fear. Lesson 2 was fruit. And lesson 3 was frustration. And in this week's video, part 4 of the From Withered and Waiting to Whole and Walking video series, we're talking faith. But before we get into today's conversation, we're going to start with the scripture. John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9, King James Version. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. And a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? The impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, and took up his bed, and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. Okay, ladies, let's talk about being women at the pool of Bethesda. Let's start by reviewing lessons 1 through 3. In part 1 of the From Withered and Waiting to Whole and Walking video series, we discussed fear. Fear that has kept us withered, paralyzed, frozen, crippled. Fear that has kept us in the shallow end. Fear that has kept us at the shoreline. Fear that has kept us stuck because we've been playing it safe. And in part 2, we focused on the fruit of patience. Now here's a man who had been sick, unwell, withered for 38 years. He had sought healing, wellness, and wholeness for almost 4 decades. He had waited. Why had it taken so long? Patience is a fruit of the Spirit, and all fruit is developed over time, and nothing comes to fruition without first disturbing the soil. So what work might God be trying to do in the soil of your heart? What are you waiting for? And what is your wait telling you about Jesus? And then in part 3, we talked about frustration. Now, this was a man who'd been immobile for 38 years. Jesus comes along and asks him if he wants to be healed. But instead of a yes, instead of a no, he gives Jesus a frustrated response. I can't because. Maybe Jesus is asking us the same question, but we're giving him our own version of a frustrated response. I can't because. Responses from prolonged disappointment with ourselves, prolonged disappointment with other people, or maybe even prolonged disappointment with him. Fear, fruit, frustration. None of this, however, kept the man from healing, and it doesn't have to keep us from healing either. Jesus said unto him, Rise, take up your bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, and took up his bed, and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. Now, Jesus didn't offer debate. He gave directions. Rise, take up your bed, walk. And the man obeyed. Jesus didn't talk to him about the past 38 years. He told him what to do in his present, in his now, that would change his future. This man, who had been withered for 38 years, long enough for sickness to become normal, long enough for invalid to become his identity, what should have been the best days of his life had instead been spent disappointed and let down. He had tried, and now he was likely just tired, sick and tired. But the man at the pool of Bethesda had a doctor's appointment that day, and he didn't even realize it. He was right on schedule for the great physician. He went from case to cure because he followed doctor's orders, because he obeyed Jesus' commands. This brings us to faith. Lesson 4. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 describes faith this way. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. One translation says it this way. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So in principle, faith is taking God at his word. If God said it, then I believe it. The man was made whole at Jesus' words. Rise, take up your bed, walk. It was both nonsensical and illogical. The man hadn't called for Jesus. He hadn't sent Jesus to come by hear my Lord request. The man hadn't even answered Jesus' question directly. Yet Jesus healed him anyway. The man hadn't been perfect, but he had been honest about his perspective. One minute he's saying, I have no man, I have no help. The next minute he's saying, but while I am coming. Even in spite of his contradiction, Jesus healed him anyway. The man at the pool of Bethesda simply obeyed. Maybe he obeyed because he figured that he didn't have anything else to lose. Nothing else had worked, no one else had helped him. Or maybe he obeyed because there was something different about this man Jesus, a presence both compassionate and commanding. Maybe he heard a conviction in Jesus' voice that gave him the confidence to move. But whatever it was, the man at the pool of Bethesda made a choice. He chose to take God at his word. He chose to believe Jesus. He was healed when Jesus spoke, but he had to get up to receive it. He had to obey. And immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. he had walked by faith. No more competition for the stirring of the water. No more striving for access to the water. Just immediate obedience. Just immediate wholeness. But just because he was whole didn't mean that every area of his life was perfect immediately. He would have had to find a job. How would his friends and family relate to him now that he was no longer vulnerable or needy? He had been down for so long, maybe he had to do the mental work to even understand what elevation even meant. But because Jesus had declared him whole, there was possibility after his pain. The man had waited a long time, but then immediately came. For 38 years, he had always been too late. But not now. Now, faith. Could today be your now faith moment? Could 2026 be your now faith year? Yes, fear paralyzed you. Yes, waiting buried you. Yes, frustration revealed you. But now it's time for faith to move you. But first, we need to ask ourselves, is our faith resting in a method or in a man? That man, Jesus. What if the question isn't, why hasn't God healed me? But, do I trust him enough to rise when he speaks? You might be saying, rise? What do you mean rise? I've been immobile for 38 years. If I could get up, I would have done it years ago. Take up your bed? What do you mean take up your bed? I've lain here for the majority of my life. This is where I've grown comfortable. And walk? What do you mean walk? I haven't used my legs in years. They won't work. They're incapable of moving me. The man at the pool of Bethesda couldn't go from withered and waiting to whole and walking on his own, and we can't either. The process cannot be done in our own ability. No amount of skill or will get us there. But for a moment, let's go back to Jesus' first public miracle. John chapter 2 tells us that Jesus was at a wedding with Mary, his mother, and the disciples. And when the wine was gone, Mary turned to Jesus and said, "They don't have any more wine." He responds, in essence, "What does that have to do with me?" Mary turned to the servants and said, "Do whatever he tells you to do." Jesus then told the servants to fill jars with water, and then he goes on to turn that water into wine. The first instructions in Jesus' first public miracle were a call to obedience. Do whatever he tells you. Obey. Listen for specific instructions. Obedience, that's our part. The outcome, now that's God's. Faith, taking God at his word, believing Jesus. Jesus used the man's condition to reveal himself to him. And 2,000 years later, he's doing the same thing. As women at our own pools of Bethesda, perhaps Jesus is saying the same thing to us. Follow my directions. Rise, take up your bed, and walk. Perhaps he's waiting for us to take him at his word. Perhaps he's waiting on us to make a faith move. Rise, get up. Elevation begins now. Take up your mat. Pick up the proof. It's the evidence of where you've been. Taking it up isn't just tidiness, it's testimony. And walk. You are capable of taking the necessary steps that will take you from where you were to where you should be. Now you might be thinking, Rewa, this is easier said than done. You don't know my story. I haven't moved on my dreams in years. I don't even remember the last time that I used my voice or my gifts. You don't know how long I've been waiting. I've been disappointed for so long. Surely I've missed my moment. I've tried and I failed. Consider this. The man at the pool of Bethesda had to use parts of himself that he hadn't used in years, and then trust that those parts still worked. There's something left in you too, but it must be exercised. Now let me tell you how I know. So yeah, let me tell you how I know. In November of 2022, I went to Israel, and our tour group visited the Pool of Bethesda. The sight literally moved me to tears. I had written the Withered and Waiting blog the year before, so I couldn't understand, it just didn't make sense to me why the sight had me so emotional, how seeing it firsthand had such an effect on me. It wasn't until the next year, in 2023, when my pastor ministered a message based on John chapter 5, that I finally got it. It finally made sense to me. I felt like God wanted me to know that I was charged with bringing broken women to the pool to be made whole. But to do that, I had to be free of, healed from, the lies that had kept me lame. I hadn't been walking in what God had called me to do because I had believed things that He didn't say. You see, God showed me the beginnings of Red Press Communications around 2017, and that was during a very dark time in my life. Everything about every area of my life was messed up and had been messed up for a while. It had me questioning my identity, my worth, my purpose, and quite honestly, even my existence. It was in that darkness, again around 2017 or so, but it was in that darkness that I finally started to see glimpses of light. The instruction to me had been to start writing, but I didn't move. If I picked up a pen, it was personal, not for the public. It wasn't until 2020 that I finally started blogging. And when God told me that it was time to add video a few years later, I still hesitated. I was scared. I was very scared for a lot of different reasons. So I waited. And I waited some more. I made excuses why I couldn't do what God was asking me to do. I'm not capable. I'm not the right woman. I'm broken myself. How can I help other women? How do I encourage other women when there are desires in my own heart that I'm still waiting to see fulfilled? Jesus didn't debate me either, but He was persistent. So I finally decided to give Him a yes. I started video recording in 2025. And then, after 2 videos, I stopped. But this year, I've decided to trust God and take him at his word. Rise, Rewa. Get up and do it. Take up your bed, Rewa. Tell your story, and then tell waiting women that the healer is coming through. Walk, Rewa, even if it's baby steps. I'm convinced that possibility must be on the other side of pain. Why else would Jesus be so persistent? I realize that God is healing me as I move in obedience. I realize that God is making me whole as I walk by faith. What does whole mean? One word for it is shalom, the Hebrew word for peace. But shalom doesn't just mean peace, or should I say peace has a much more robust definition than we often give it credit for. It means completeness, wholeness, health, safety, and prosperity. And another word for whole is sozo. Now that's a Greek word, and it means to save, heal, deliver, and make whole. It's not just spiritual salvation, it's complete restoration. Now, what wholeness doesn't mean is that you'll never get scared, or that you'll never get tired of waiting, or that you'll never get frustrated. Wholeness means that they won't keep you from moving. God's desire is to take us from peace to peace, from PIECE to PEACE. No longer withered, but whole. No longer waiting, but walking. God's desire is to take us from peace to peace in every area of our lives. That's spiritually, relationally, financially, professionally, and emotionally. God's desire is to take us from the mat to movement. Rise. That's to make a decision. Contrary to the immobility of fear, healing begins when we decide to move when Jesus speaks. Take up your bed. That's description. The bed, the mat, it describes the life that we've lived for years. One of waiting. A life that has required the fruit of patience. But when Jesus makes us whole, the mat takes on a new meaning. Now it describes God's work in our lives. Walk. That's about direction. Frustration may tell us that we'll always be stuck, that we'll always be behind, that we'll always be too late. But when Jesus says walk, everything changes. What was once impossible becomes possible. Walk by faith, trusting God to order our steps. You couldn't do it before, but now you can. Rise, take up your bed, and walk. Now, aren't you just a little bit curious about what may be on the other side of your obedience? Aren't you just a little bit curious about what whole and walking could look like for you? Maybe you're thinking, but Rewa, I don't know how. Right now, for you, maybe rising looks like stillness, and that's okay. Get still before God, not because you're slinking or shrinking, but because you're seeking. As we end the first quarter of 2026, how does God want to reveal a new you or do a new thing? How is this stillness intentional? How is this stillness preparation for movement? Instead of being frozen, how is this stillness stoking the fire in your bones? Now, some of you may already know what God is calling you to in this season, but you haven't moved on the word or on the instruction that He's given you. Perhaps you're upright, but you're standing still. Bend down to get your story, gather that lesson learned, and then walk. Live the life that God purposed for you, one step at a time, one day at a time. Now, you would think that after seeing him withered and waiting for 38 years, that the man's community would have celebrated his healing, but they didn't. Instead of celebrating, they criticized. Everyone may not applaud. Rise anyway. Everyone may not understand. Take up your bed anyway. Everyone may not support. Walk anyway. Sis, I want to leave you with this. While Jesus may have been unknown by the man at the pool of Bethesda, the man wasn't unknown by Jesus. Jesus saw him, and he sees you too, specifically and individually, even amongst a pool of other women. What's keeping you from walking by faith? What's keeping you from taking God at His word? What's keeping you from obedience? Maybe you're questioning if you heard Him, or if you heard Him correctly. Or maybe you think that wholeness and obedience and walking are for other people, that for some reason you're exempt. But Lamentations 3:22 through 23 says this: through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because His compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. One Hebrew translation of the word Bethesda is house of mercy. God's mercies are new every day, and that day, mercy itself showed up for the man at the pool of Bethesda. And the Lord has new mercies for you too. Fear paralyzed you, waiting buried you, frustration revealed you, but faith will move you. And when faith moves you, Jesus will take you from withered and waiting to whole and walking. Rise in confidence, carry your story unapologetically, and walk boldly and faithfully into all that God has prepared for your life. Take God at His word. Obey. Do whatever He says. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. Your best days are ahead. Believe again. Hope again. You can do it. Press on, sis. Press on. If this video or this video series has added any value to you, please like, please comment, please share, and please subscribe.